On the very first page of the very first chapter of your book, you say that you always dreamed about being a photographer for Playboy.
I sure did.
You go on to say, quote, subject matter aside, the artistic quality of their photographs was always amazing to me, unquote. Who are you fooling? You love the artistic quality. You're so full of shit.
Owning what your core values are and then hiring for core values is the easiest way to have predictable success in hiring. Because if you understand that people operate the same way in which everybody who's successful in the business operates, it doesn't matter who they are, what their age, sex, anything is. None of that matters because they will come in and they will be able to fit in on day one and operate the same way as which to meet your expectations. But we focus so much on skills that we completely ignore all that stuff. And then we scratch our heads at the end of the day, like 3 months later, when you have to get rid of somebody, you're like, I wonder where we went wrong. Well, the whole interview was, it's a speed date where you're hiring the pretty girl. That's it.
Welcome to Unlocking Moves. We're going to cover those key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the lives of successful entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear their stories because I think we learn the most from stories. But I don't want to hear just their glory stories. I want to hear their gory stories because, as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. My guest today is someone who is also in the recruiting business. So maybe you could say we're slightly competitive, but he uses a lot more AI in his business than I do at HireBetter. And I'll tell you, there's not a lot of great recruiters out there. So when I have the opportunity to talk to one, we're wanting to definitely talk talent with my guest today. However, Rick, before we get started, you probably know how this works. I like to throw my guests off the wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready for this?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So on the very first page of the very first chapter of your book, you say that you always dreamed about being a photographer for Playboy.
I sure did.
You go on to say, quote, subject matter aside, the artistic quality of their photographs was always amazing to me, unquote. So Rick, I got to tell you, on this show, we try to be very, very authentic. So I want to ask you, who are you fooling? You love the artistic quality. You're so full of shit.
No, you know what? Look at the like the photography back in the day was amazing. And I got to work on a couple Playboy shoots and like, it was incredible, but hey, the naked girls didn't hurt, right? I'm like, I'm not gonna lie. And it was funny because I did work on 2 Playboy shoots. I never saw the girls the whole time. I was in the back of I was in the back room loading film and testing lighting for the set after the set. So, it was very disappointing couple of shoots for me.
I appreciate that, man. As you guys can tell, my guest today is Rick Girard. He's the founder of Intertru, which leverages the hell out of AI, and HireOS, which is a hiring methodology that he developed. And he's got a long and decorated career in recruiting, and he's the author of Healing Career Wounds, which must be good because the back cover of the book has a quote from Gino Wickman that says, the book, quote, teaches entrepreneurs to hire the right way. So we're going to have a great conversation today with Rick Girard. Welcome to Unlocking Moves, Rick.
Hey, pleasure to be here, Kurt. I love it. And thank you for reading my book. I only listened to yours on Audible. So like now I'm feeling guilty that I didn't do that.
Hey, if you can suffer through my voice for 3 hours, you are a better man than me.
Actually, your voice was actually quite pleasant. I've heard way worse. So
awesome. Well, thank you for that. You're hired.
Thank you.
All right, Rick. I think you and I are somewhat kindred spirits because your book also says that you've been a rebel ever since you sprang from the wound, was the quote, I believe. And
whoa,
did I say wound?
Yeah,
I knew I was going to say that. Son of a gun. As I wrote it down, I knew I was going to say that. Well, you take it to the next level because you say that you follow the George Costanza method, which is basically that you figured out the way to win is to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that actually sprang from early in my career. I, like everybody who becomes a recruiter, nobody dreams of becoming a recruiter. Essentially, you fall into it one way or the other. I just happened to have my cousin had a really successful company and invited me to go work with him when they decided to move up to Sun Valley, Idaho. And so I will say that having no business background at all, I did photography and worked in a photography studio. I was thrown to the wolves. And, but I'm a grinder, and I was really motivated to make a lot of money because I know he made a lot of money. So fast forward 6 months, first 6 months were like the most brutal time of my life. Like I hated my life because it's hard. And, you're dealing with a lot of rejection and it's all cold calling and, it was tough, but I'm not a quitter. So I had a week where I was like all set up on Monday. I had all kinds of like really good interviews that were turning into offers. And I had 5 offers that were turned down on the same day. I had already spent that money. So, man, I went home. I was kind of depressed and I pop on the TV and that episode of Seinfeld came on with George Costanza doing the opposite. And that was kind of an aha moment in my brain where I was like, everybody's doing the same thing. And I got outmaneuvered like on most of these deals by better recruiters. And so that was my kind of wake up moment to, well, if you start doing everything differently what everybody else is doing, then you're not as predictable and then you can't lose. So that's where I started to evolve my craft into a different way.
I love it. It's kind of like the blue ocean strategy. If you really want to do something well, don't swim by the shores where all the sharks are and everything's red because of the blood. Swim out to deeper waters where it's you and you've got your own differentiator. I love it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so walk me back a little bit. So you were a Playboy photographer, or at least you worked in the back room of a Playboy photographer or whatever. And
no, I worked for a portrait photographer, but I also was able to pick up some side shoots. And I worked on 2 Playboy photo shoots, but like it was, like I said, I was loading film in the back room. That's all I was doing the whole time.
I got you. So I made it sound much more grandiose than it really was. But
yeah.
Anyway, you go from being a photographer to the recruiting business. Was it mainly or only because you had a friend or a brother-in-law that was a very wealthy recruiter?
It was 2 reasons. One, the poor starving artist thing wasn't really boding well with me. I think it was funny. Those shoots that I talked about, I think I made $125 a day. Like you can't live on that. And you're working like 12, 14-hour days. And that combined with the fact that my cousin had this company, he was actually moving up to Idaho. So Sun Valley, Idaho at the time. And at the time I was really big into snowboarding. So it kind of evolved into, well, I moved up there really to snowboard and live in a ski town and fell into a career.
I love it. So you started into it because of the money and because of the lifestyle, because you wanted to be lazy, but you're still in it for a different reason. Tell me why you're still in the space.
Because I love it. I'm fascinated by the way people work and make decisions. I'm like a hacker. Like I love to figure out ways to get better at things that are unconventional. So, even right now, we don't do a whole lot of search work, but like we've got one client that we're working with right now who we're helping them out like as their people organization to kind of get them going. And I'm having so much fun kind of like relearning what's happening in the industry a little bit and then kind of trying to hack it and get it better. Right. So I don't know. It's great. I just love it.
So let me get this straight. You're not necessarily doing much recruiting anymore for clients, but you have built this system that you're implementing for clients. Is that right?
True. Correct.
All right.
Correct.
Great.
Yeah. So, and it's, we, like I said, we currently have one customer, like they don't have anybody heading up people. So I stepped up and said, hey, let me do it. It'll be fun.
Nice. Well, I love it when you get to do what you love doing, and anytime that you can do that, you're in a magical place. I want to ask you about the HireOS method, but before I do, it sounds like one of the turning points in your going from all about the money and the lifestyle to maybe where you are now is a friend must have hit you upside the head and said something along the lines of, Rick, you're a resume-flinging cowboy. Tell me how that hit you and what made you change.
If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by HireBetter, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it was true. That's all I was taught to be, was a resume slinging monkey who essentially like, I would I got really good at recruiting people. So like my whole business, like my whole model was, I didn't pull people off job boards. I would go and I would find people, I would recruit them out of companies, and then I would turn around and I would set them up on interviews with 5 to 6 companies in hopes that I would increase my chances that I would be able to place that person. So I didn't actually approach it from filling jobs perspective. I approached it from, I'm going to place this human. And so and I had other recruiters in my ecosystem that were like smarter than me, and we were really competitive. So, I just didn't want to be the same as everybody else. And then that, those little trigger points are what got me to kind of, bust out of the monotony of, because if you're just a resume-slinging cowboy, you're essentially it's a grind. It's not that much fun.
And honestly, that's everything that's broken about the recruiting industry is exactly what you described. Contingent recruiters flipping resumes, trying to make an easy buck. And the clients are always talking about these recruiters who are just throwing resumes against the wall to see what sticks. And that's why my first ebook was entitled "The Recruiting Industry's Broken." And that's why we've just taken such a different tack with HireBetter. So I can appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? It's people want quality, not quantity. And, but I don't know, which is one of the things that I found is that if you're just slinging resumes, you're in a race to the bottom, and that's not a race I want to be in.
I love it. Yep.
Yeah.
So let's get onto the HireOS methodology. And I want to start with, your book is entitled Healing Career Wounds, and the subtitle is The HireOS Method. So tell me how those two intertwine, and tell me what the HireOS method is.
Yeah. So the book title is a little bit misleading. I probably should have named it the HireOS method. That probably would have been a better title. But what I was using the book title is the punchline. One of the things that I discovered was that, especially if you're recruiting people out of a company, or you're trying to cultivate and bring people on board to your organization, you don't want to create a transactional experience, meaning, it's all about the money, which is what most people make decisions on. And most people think that that's the reason why people make decisions or turn down offers, is because, well, we couldn't pay them what somebody else would, that sort of thing. But I discovered there's quite a few more different types of compensation that are more important to people. And that has to do with healing their career wounds, right? Because, the job statistic data is usually or the disengagement data is like around 68 to 71% of people are disengaged and discontent in their current jobs. But a lot of them don't go to market to make a move because, it's just a lot of work, and nobody likes to interview or go through that whole job search process until you're forced to, which is usually when you get laid off. So if you can demonstrate to a person that you can heal their career wounds, it creates a much tighter bond and a better opportunity channel for you to be able to attract and hire an A player than just focusing in on the compensation. And I think that's the big mistake that everybody focuses in on, is that, look, at people will take less compensation for growth or a better team or better work, or, other things that are more important to them than the actual paycheck.
So it's almost like a dating app being entitled The Healing Childhood Wounds.
That's a whole nother can of worms I don't even want to attack.
Well, hey, tell me about a couple of examples when you say career wounds that really might resonate with our audience.
Yeah. Where I kind of discovered this was, I had a gentleman one time who I placed into a role. It was a senior level role. And, the company was not, we were up against an offer from Google, and they were not in a position to be able to match Google's offer. But what they could really demonstrate and bring home to him is that his growth path could be clearly defined, and he can get to where he wanted to get into his career. And that growth came through specific project milestones that would get him to where he wants to go. So it was very clearly defined. It wasn't like, hey, look at, just come in and let's just hope something works out and you're going to be another cog in the wheel and we'll pay you a lot of money. And that was way more important to him than bringing home a $200K a month, $200K a year paycheck. So like they paid him $50,000 less, but the guy really thrived in that role. So he walked away from a $50,000 paycheck, but in essence, he took off. He was able to like really elevate and drive his career. And that's what a lot of people want. It's far more important than, getting into a crappy job where you're just pushing the same button every day, but they're paying you a lot of money.
So the wound, so to speak, is really just the ability to grow and have a career versus just a job.
Yeah.
In his case.
It's individualistic too. It's not, like we think that if we give people, we offer good benefits that we're going to attract everybody. Some people care about them. Some people don't. So it really has to do with what's important to that person, that individual. And that requires that you dig in deep in that first, discovery conversation to understand like, where's the motivators for this person?
That's exactly right. Do I need a time off? Do I want more money? Do I want a sabbatical? Do I want a career path? All the good stuff. So that obviously feeds into the HireOS interview methodology. Tell me about that. Tell me a couple of the key takeaways.
Yeah, so that's great. So we build on 3 pillars: pain, desire, and impact, right? So we want to understand, first off, does somebody really have a legitimate reason to make a move? Kicking tires to get more, like to make more money, or like using leveraging an offer to get a a counter offer at their current company, or just kind of window shopping. They're not going to really make a move, but they have some time to figure something out. Like we want to avoid that. If they don't have a legitimate reason to make a move, then, so long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, good night, right? So that's pain. Desire is we want to understand what environment a person's going to thrive in. The biggest mistake that I have seen, and actually this kind of relates to your resume, Ralph, is that we get enamored by somebody's track history. Like, oh gosh, this guy worked at Facebook or this woman worked at Amazon. They're going to be amazing here, but they're not really positioned right for small business, for a small company. It has to be kind of really ingrained in their DNA that they want to work at a small business. And when you try to fit those people into those situations, it doesn't work out. The worst hire that I've ever seen in my career, consistently I've seen companies make, and I've worked with tech startups and they all want to hire people out of FANG companies, right? They all fail. Like most of them fail. And the reason why they fail is because they don't have the resources and everything else that they get at one of those companies, that they don't have the ability to work in such a way that is conducive to a startup, right? And then impact is, I want to know if I have an A, B, or C player. And the way that you learn that is fairly easy. You simply walk through what somebody's done. You go deep in on a project that they did that either saved time, increased revenue, or gained recognition from leadership. And here's one thing that's conducive with every high performer that I've ever met is they can actually drill down on exactly what they did and how they did it step by step. They know the details. And so when people don't know the details, it tells me that they're claiming to do something that they didn't do. And that's something that we usually miss when we're interviewing people, because we're so concerned with asking 25 different questions and getting through a basic, overview of things that when you drill down deep, I like to say, like, the wheels come off the bus usually around the 3rd or 4th, dig deeper question.
Well, I like the way you said that. First of all, thank you for the plug for Resume Ralph for my book, Who's Your Mike? We'll get into it in a second. But on the interview questions, I like digging deeper into what they actually did and asking the tell me more types of questions. Many of our audience and our clients are entrepreneurs, and we're glass half full folks. So we often spend most of our time telling the candidate how great we are or our company is because we're enamored by their Facebook or whatever background. And so we fail to ask those key next level questions because we're so busy trying to sell them, right?
Because we show up and throw up.
Exactly. I can't tell you how many times I've come out of a or I've heard of both sides of a candidate and, entrepreneur interview, and the entrepreneur's like, oh, it was great. I want to hire that person. And then you talk to the candidate, they're like, well, I didn't get a word in edgewise. Like, I didn't say anything. I said 2 words.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had a CEO one time. I don't know if I told this story in my book, but like I talk about it quite often. I had a CEO one time. My first retained search that I did was for a tech company. It was for a CTO, and he interviewed a candidate. It was like the 3rd candidate. And basically they talked for 45 minutes about the Oakland A's, and they had a conversation about baseball, not about the business, not about what they do, anything like that. So the interview wraps up and I talked to the CEO. I was like, oh, it was great. I love this guy. We want to hire him. We're going to make him an offer. And then tell me about what you guys talked about. Oh, we both had the same favorite players. It was ridiculous, right? And I fought him on. I said, look, you can't do this. We need to actually have a structured conversation. I'll even help you do that, but you need to understand whether or not he's going to fit or not. And he just went ahead and did it. I didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, if it fails, it's on you. Like, don't call me back in 6 months and tell me you want your money back, because I'm fighting you on this. And we have 2 other candidates that are just as strong, if not stronger. And I'm not even kidding. 6 months to the day afterwards, he calls me again, wanting his money back and saying, hey, this guy didn't work out. Why did you let me hire him? Tried to blame me. And, we always get the blame. And what we found out was that he ran out 2 of the engineers that were his founding engineers. Basically, it cost them just under $1 million in 6 months.
Ouch.
For that one hire. We helped him get back on track, but man, it almost put the business out of business. And that was kind of another one of those experiences that made me go, people don't know how to interview. So this is where HireOS came from, was that need to get people good at interviewing so that they're making decisions based on evidence as opposed to assumptions, bias, and personal motives.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a horrible story. First of all, obviously lots of lessons learned. It sounds kind of like Techno Tim, a character from Who's Your Mike. Actually, we have an epilogue in the book entitled When You're the Problem. And that was geared towards the entrepreneur or the leader who, no matter how great a job we do in providing great talent, oftentimes you're the problem. And so we need to, how do we fix that? Because you're the consistent in the repeated fails in the hiring process.
That's what I set out to solve that problem with HireOS. That's it.
Well, I like the way you're helping people hire better, and you can use my tagline in your company from now on if you'd like, with special dispensation.
Nice. Well, we'll set it up like you can hire better with a Intertru interview, right?
Perfect. Hey, nice little segue over to my book. I know when we first met, we were talking a little bit about my book, Who's Your Mike? And I know you said a couple of really nice things to me. I don't know if you remember saying these, but I wrote them down so I could quote them. You said you loved the style of the book and that you were even envious about the style. That was kind of cool. And then you also said the only thing you disagreed was when I said that there is no right answer. You said actually there is a right answer and it's tied to core values. So riff on either one of those topics or both.
Yeah, no, I mean, I listened to your book and I was like, I loved it. You kept me engaged. I know you're your own worst critic. I'm the same way with my book. It's the same thing, but yeah, you kept me engaged and I was like, oh yeah, it was super relatable to me. So yeah, in one of the things, throughout my career that I did learn was the people who actually stick with companies are the ones who align with the behaviors that drive the core values in the organization. Now, I'm going to preface that by saying every company has core values. Whether or not you recognize them is a whole different thing. But, owning what your core values are and then hiring for core values is the easiest way to have predictable success in hiring. Because if you understand that people operate the same way in which everybody who's successful in the business operates, it doesn't matter, who they are, what their age, sex, anything is, right? None of that matters because they will come in and they will be able to fit in on day one and operate the same way as which to meet your expectations. But we focus so much on skills that we completely ignore all that stuff. And then we scratch our heads at the end of the day, like 3 months later, when you have to get rid of somebody, you're like, I wonder where we went wrong. Well, the whole interview was, it's a speed date where you're hiring the pretty girl. That's it.
It's kind of like your baseball example where a baseball team goes out and gets the most expensive, talented free agent, but then they're a locker room misfit. And so the culture of the team spirals downhill. It's amazing to me when these great franchises are able to continue to build because they built a great culture within the team.
I think sports teams do a much better job of bringing the right person in the right role than companies do, for sure. They look at things like personality and who's going to mesh with what. Those conversations don't typically happen. And when I was doing a lot of my retained search work, it's like I'd bring up those conversations and they'd be like looking at me, but that doesn't matter. We just need somebody with the skills. I'm like, no, it does matter. It matters a ton because you can throw an A player into the wrong company and they're going to become a C player really quickly, or they're going to quit.
That makes a lot of sense. In fact, that sounds like a good podcast episode to talk about the analogies between sports teams and businesses. So I've got one more question on Who's Your Mike, and that's tell me your favorite character from the book. So just a reminder for the audience, each chapter is a different archetype or character you're going to encounter on your entrepreneurial journey. And so I know you have one favorite because we talked about it earlier, Rick, but who's yours?
I think it was Resume Ralph, right?
Yep.
The guy who's got all the credentials. And I think that really ties into the positioning. Like you can have somebody with all the credentials and they could be great just because somebody was great in their current company doesn't mean they're going to be great in yours.
Especially, as you said earlier, the large company, the Facebook or Google experience doesn't necessarily translate to HireBetter or Intertru, right?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
No, I think, when I hear these conversations and like, I still have a good network of recruiters that reach out to me from time to time looking for help and, if I can do any referrals. And it's always the conversation that just makes me laugh so hard is the CEO who just got, a big chunk of cash and they only want to hire people out of, Facebook, Google, or Apple, right? And you're just like, it's like, wanting a Ferrari for a Yugo budget. It just doesn't happen.
I had one of those just a few weeks ago, whereas all the creme de la creme companies you can think about, and they wanted like a 5 or 6 person team from that, and just impossible. Yeah. And I'm not sure it was really obviously it wasn't the right answer for them anyway. Hey, so Rick, we've reached the point where we try to uncover your unlocking move, which is again a key decision point or inflection point that really changed the trajectory of your career. What do you think yours might have been, or maybe a couple of them?
Yeah, I've had a bunch of them, I think. Just like anybody, you fall in and out of love with your role. When I moved back to California I had this kind of weird thing where I built a recruiting firm with a partner, sold my interest back to him. I moved to Hawaii for 10 years. Then I packed up and I moved back to California. And I hired some junior people. I was trying to repeat what we had did prior that worked, and it just kind of wasn't really working. I wasn't getting the people that I wanted to work with. Just wasn't gelling or taking off. And so I just decided, hey, you know what? I'm just going to restructure. I'm going to go and I'm just going to do a retained search. And it was just due to the necessity that like, I didn't want to do contingency anymore. It just felt like, and so, yeah, that was kind of one of the pivot points. And then it took a while. That was super painful, but it was, but I learned a ton, and actually it helped me to evolve these other things. I think there's been so many little turning points in my life because I do things the wrong way so many times that it's a constant flow. So I can't really pinpoint one, I guess, to answer your question.
Well, it sounds like going into business with your cousin because you admired his lifestyle was definitely an unlocking move for you because it moved you from the photography studio to the recruiting industry.
Yeah, that's for sure it. Yeah. That and the fact that it, got me 100 days a year of snowboarding every year. So
perfect. Well, that's what can you not like about that? Making a lot of money and skiing 100 days a year.
Yeah, exactly.
So I've got two more questions, but this one is, I call it the listener's advocate question. because I like to say, if I've got Rick Girard here in a room by myself, what would I want Kurt to ask him? And so, because you're in the recruiting industry, my question is going to be, tell me the wildest interview, recruiting, candidate related story you have. I know you mentioned one earlier, but just the craziest thing you can imagine happened. Tell me the story.
Man, I've worked, like there's a ton of weird ones that happen. Like, we actually had somebody replace that like on a Friday, and over the weekend they died. And
shit.
I mean, like that was really kind of a weird thing. It was really impactful because we really liked the person. They were super excited, and they had a heart attack on Sunday and passed away. We had a situation one time where we sent somebody into an interview, and both the interviewer and the interviewee had to go to the bathroom. So they went into the bathroom at the same time during the interview. And the interviewee got super creeped out because the interviewer was like kind of peeking as he's in the urinal. I mean, there's a bunch of like little weird stories that have happened. I mean, the guy who hired for baseball commonality, I've had that happen like so many times. Like people look for common reasons to hire somebody, like something in common, like, oh, you went to this school, I went to that school, we're friendly schools. And yeah, those are always battles that I've had to like kind of fight, that's the other one, people get locked into a school. Like we only want to hire people out of these 5 schools. Google put out a study, I think it was in 2015 or something like that, where they said that they came back with their most successful hires come from the University of Illinois at Chicago. Like not even like an Ivy League school. So
I have that conversation almost daily about these quote elite schools. And I can tell you they're always, I shouldn't say always, they're usually quote much smarter than everybody else. But I would typically like somebody with the grit, maybe somebody who put themselves through school by waiting tables or working on an assembly line or whatever.
I what I like to throw back is I say every school has a bottom 10%. Why would you want to hire any of them?
I like that.
Yeah.
Like that. So I've got one more question. It is a bit of a trick question. And that is, can you think of one question that you're never asked, and either you secretly wish they would, or you're kind of glad that they don't?
One question that I'm never asked and I secretly wish they would is, how do I get really good at interviewing? Like people either understand and will admit that they're really bad at interviewing. So then they try to hire somebody else to do it. But then that person's not really strong at interviewing. And so you have this almost a blame chain that is passed up, that is created, where like the CEO doesn't want to be good at hiring, but it's their company and they should be the best one at hiring. And I'm part of EO, and more entrepreneurs should be asking that question. Like, how do I get really good at interviewing so that I can hire the strongest people?
Well, I'm guilty because I'm very similar to what you just described. I'm a very bad interviewer because I like everybody. So I got to ask you, tell me how to actually interview well, Rick.
Yeah. I mean, I've struggled with that too for my own business as well. Right. Like, cause I want to like everybody. Like that's the entrepreneur. I look for reasons to like people. So you got to take that completely out of the equation. So that's why I structured process so that I'm just dealing with evidence, and I'm loading my gut up with evidence to support whether or not the person really should move forward. Because look, I look for every reason to hire somebody, especially if I like them. But if I'm not getting the data from them that's important, like how they actually did something, then I have no business making the hire.
Perfect. I like it. Yeah. Evidence to support why you're hiring them, and being able to probably explain that to someone else so you're held accountable for it as well, or at least write it down so you can look back at it later. Yeah. All right. I want to ask you, because I think it's important. I want to ask you about the Hire Power radio show and podcast, because I know you have a podcast out there yourself. Tell me 30 seconds about it.
Yeah, which I'm going to hit you up because I want you to be on it in the next month or so if you can come on.
Perfect.
So I developed it, just like you did, as a tool for business development, right? And, the mission has kind of twisted toward like, we want to help entrepreneurs do a much better job of hiring. So a lot of times we actually bring on CEOs and entrepreneurs, and we talk about either like the biggest hiring mistake they ever made or something they did really well that might be able to be transferable to another CEO. A lot of times, I mean, most of the show is talking about, a bad hire they made and, how they've been able to try to figure out how to avoid that in the future. And it's a problem solution show. So what we do is we kind of have we want to tackle one issue at a deep level. And, we broadcast every Tuesday at noon live on LinkedIn Live. We actually are in the midst of, we stockpiled a bunch of episodes from last year and we're kind of releasing them daily right now, but we're going to kick into like more of our weekly cadence next month.
Nice. Sign me up. Sounds like a fun podcast and a fun way to really help entrepreneurs and business leaders solve challenges. And yours is specifically around hiring challenges. Right?
For sure. Yeah.
Well, hey, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Rick, thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to ask the audience to please go like and subscribe and give us a 5-star review. We're just a few short of our goal. And Rick, you do that too, please.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kurt. This was, you know what? I've done a lot of podcasts. I love the format. I love the structure. I find that like I get lost in these kind of meandering conversation ones. So yeah, just keep up the great work.
Awesome, man. I appreciate that, Rick. Take care. We'll look forward to seeing you on Higher Power Radio shortly.
You know it.
If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.